So this morning, we're going to open up our Bibles and look at a very specific, honestly, it's kind of a strange episode in the life of Jesus and his disciples, and we're going to watch firsthand how Jesus addresses a powerful, complicated issue that, to be honest, affects every one of us and the people we relate to. We're going to start off in the book of Mark, chapter 10, somewhere around verse 35, and let me just set this scene for you. You put the next slide up. We are in the week leading up to the final week of Christ. This is, and you may know the story as well, it is right before the triumphal entry. Think Palm Sunday, think King on the donkey, and there's just buzz everywhere. Welcome King Jesus, Hosanna. The takeaway everywhere was Jesus is king, worship him. And if you're in Mark 10 and you read before and after, the passage we look at, Jesus is talking about his suffering and his death, and his disciples, of course, are right there. They're nodding, they're giving him thumbs up, they're following along, and here's what happens next. Two of Jesus' disciples, James and John, go to Jesus, and it seems like it's in private, or they're passing notes or something, and they ask Jesus a favor. And it goes something like this. They go, okay, so Jesus, since we're on the topic of you, and you're a big deal, look, can you do a favor for me? When you become king, can I be your right-hand man? And, I guess left-hand man too, whatever. There's two of us. Like, in short, Jesus, you might be a big deal, and you're about to have this moment, like whatever you're talking about here, but in that moment, Jesus, can you think about me? That's the setting. And we'll pick it up, if you have your Bible open, in verse 41, where we discover really quickly that James and John aren't the only people asking this question, because Mark says that when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And a couple details here. The 10 other disciples, they weren't indignant, and the word means angry, losing their temper. They didn't lose it for Jesus' sake. Like, they weren't going, James and John, how dare you think of yourself like Jesus is about to be tortured and crucified? Like, think about him. No, that's not what they're upset about. They were angry because these two didn't think about them. Like, how dare you, James and John, not think about me at this moment? You sneaky punks trying to sneak off with Jesus and ask him favors. You're not considering us. If anybody should be thought of right now, it's me. All of us, but especially me, is why they were losing their temper, which is kind of, this whole thing's like a funny scenario, right? But it's not that funny because it's such a common problem. This right here is the story of every community's kryptonite. This is the kind of thing that will wreck your family. This will damage your relationships at work. This messes up schools, churches, people getting angry because they're not feeling considered or valued. And you totally get what the disciples are thinking, right? Like, you forgot about me? Like, I'm offended, I'm taken for granted. It's like, come on, James and John, like, you had this party with Jesus, and sure, you forgot to invite me. I don't feel included, I'm isolated, unappreciated, unthanked, unloved. So what do? Well, I get indignant. And in real life, you retaliate or you withdraw. Like, this whole scenario here, this feeling, indignation, offense, like, we could, again, I might do this every week, but we could probably pass a microphone around, and you could all tell 100 different stories about broken community, damaged relationships that you've experienced from this exact problem. And Jesus is about to speak to that, and when he does, we're about to read something shocking. And if you put Jesus' words in response to every time you find yourself in this situation, it'll be shocking, because what we find is Jesus is going to flip the narrative. He takes their exceptions and assumptions and turns it upside down. And what he says next is so fascinating. And I'm convinced, after studying this for a while, that if we can actually hear Jesus' words spoken to us, and I'll be the first to admit, like, what he's about to say is really, really hard. But if you could listen to what Jesus says and take his words to heart, at what is honestly a pretty common scenario in all of our lives, this has the potential to have a profound, powerful impact in your community, your relationships, and your own mental sanity. Here's what happens. The next verse. Jesus called them together. Which I'll just stop and point out something obvious. If Jesus has to call people together, it implies that this group of people were divided or they're not together. Like, think about the scenario again, right? Jesus' disciples, they're angry, it says. I imagine they were arguing, taking sides. Maybe it's easy to imagine this devolving into slander and gossip and jealousy. Like, none of us have not been in a situation like this. In fact, these disciples may have been like sort of special. They're talking to Jesus, but other than that, it sounds really ordinary, right? For those of us who've lived in community and had friends and relationships, you've probably seen community divided over this same problem. Anyway, Jesus calls these divided, argumentative, feuding, former friends together, and here's what he tells them. He says, I don't need to tell you people, that those who are regarded as the rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. In other words, look, people, do you know what politicians, rock stars, CEOs, and movie stars all have in common? Do you know what they all get? Attention, authority. Like, when you're great, people give you attention, and you could even demand to be the center of attention. Like, it's true even today. When a great person walks in the room, you all notice. In fact, some of you have met celebrities, and you will tell the story about meeting people who are great. If you're at a fair or a restaurant somewhere and there's a great person, I think it's the law today. You have to take out your phones and take a selfie because great people are never ignored. They're never not considered. Like, I don't know why we all do this, but we do it because they're great. You all know this. And Jesus seemed to say, you all naturally think that's what greatness looks like, which is why we're all upset when we're ignored or people don't listen to us or people don't consider us or we're overlooked. And in this moment, like, I imagine Jesus' disciples, because they didn't know what the next verse was going to say, I imagine all of them going, Jesus, it's about time. You get me. Like, finally, Jesus. Like, you get exactly what's up. You know what's going on, and you get me now, Jesus. All I want is to have authority and attention for nameless, faithless people. I don't know, everyone needs to think about me for a change. Give me attention, consideration. That's all I want. Jesus, whew, finally you get me. Thank you for listening. But Jesus doesn't end there. If he did, everybody would be happy. What he says next changes everything. Because Jesus, in the face of that cultural assumption that was true back then, and I'll be honest, we still have this assumption today, Jesus says, to the shock of everybody who hears him, he ends that thought with, not so with you. It's almost like Jesus said, look, I get it, I hear you, and you're wrong. In this sense, he says, instead of what? Like, instead of what everybody wants attention, respect, consideration, respect. Instead of greatness as we all define it, Jesus says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And I imagine at that, he drops the mic and the disciples drop their jaws and are just stunned and speechless. They have no response to this. Because what Jesus just said was shocking. In one of those sort of critical teaching moments that Jesus was so good at seizing upon. Because right here, Jesus communicates something for all of us that is countercultural and radical about life following God. That was the upside down part of being a Christian, that somehow the path to greatness is downward. The path to greatness is humility, Jesus says. And specifically, the path to greatness is found in serving others. In other words, and this is powerful, if you want your Christian community to flourish, it takes people just like us being willing to get demoted in the eyes of the world, maybe even the eyes of ourselves. It would take, I'm thinking about what that would take. It would take human beings like us who all naturally want respect, powerful attention. We'd have to be changed and to be people who would gladly throw off self-glory and self-love and selfishness to become servants, just like Jesus. And this is the radical call that will turn average community into something amazing. And I'll be honest, the disciples don't get it. And if you read this and you scratch your head and go, I don't get it, if you're skeptical about this, if you don't think it's going to work, you're in really good company, because here are 12 normal people just like us, except they got to spend years with Jesus, and they still don't understand what Jesus is talking about. So Jesus, I think for their benefit and for ours, circles back to the same exact lesson a couple days later. If you have a Bible, go to John 13. I don't have this on the screen. I'm going to read this for you. But what Jesus does next, right before he's crucified, hours before he's arrested, it shocks his disciples. It actually offends Peter. What does Jesus do right before he's arrested? What is that one thing, like right before he gets arrested, going to the garden, what is that thing that he wants everybody to know? I'll be honest, if I were Jesus in that situation, I don't know, maybe give a locker room speech, rally his followers. Jesus does something shocking and controversial. This is John 13. Here's the setting. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing. He wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. I'll skip to verse 12. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightfully so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your teacher, your Lord, now that I've washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Now this story right here is a startling passage. And I skipped over some of the verses for time where Peter is just offended and angry and upset. This is one of these stories that by design should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And if you really understand it, both of those things should kind of hit you at the same time. What do we learn from this story about what it means to follow Jesus? So what do we, in this moment, what do we learn about ourselves? And what does Jesus want you to know about serving humbly and loving other people this way? I love this story. In fact, I'm convinced that if you could get this story, if you could apply it to your life, if you could see Jesus in that moment, it has the potential to change your life, to bring more life to your community, and put your relationships in a more healthy spot. Let me give you a couple observations, and like a lot of what you're hearing today, this is from Tim Lane and Paul David Tripp. What the other thing I'm going to ask you to do is you have a section in your bulletin and a handout. I think I'm calling it homework. I'm going to ask you to do this on your own later, but for now, here's what I'm going to give you. First lesson: circumstances don't determine whether you serve or not. I mean, at least for Jesus, like, circumstances seem to be a really good variable for me. Why don't I serve? I'm busy. Like, I have never been so bored that I wash people's feet. In fact, sometimes I'll be driving somewhere and I don't even want anyone ahead of me while we're merging. Why? Because I got circumstances. I'm an important guy and I got stuff. I don't even know what I got, but I know I got something that makes me too busy to let people in front of me. And here's the thing: when you're going through circumstances or difficulty, what do you want to do? Well, you don't want to do anything. You want other people to do things for you. You want to be served and not serve. So here's a question: do you know who else, like besides me and, well, some of you, had a lot of good excuses? Do you know who else was busy, had circumstances that could get in the way of serving people? I could think of at least one person: Jesus, right? This is a crazy week for Jesus. He's about to die on the cross, like he's looking at his watch, about to get arrested. Think about what he's doing. In that moment, he knows that the wrath of a just and holy God will soon fall on him. That the punishment for the sins of the world is about to crush him. And Jesus knows what's going on, that in just a few days, what's going on. And I'd be stressed out, to be honest. I'd be worried. Do you know what Jesus is doing? In that moment, he serves. He has every excuse not to do anything for people. And he does in that moment, like what people should have done for him. He takes this bucket and a cloth and just scrubs people's feet. Here's a guy who had so many excuses. He would have, like, everybody would have understood if you said, "Don't you people know what I'm about to do?" Right? Could you just, I don't know, be extra nice to me today, maybe? He doesn't do that. He gets on his hands and knees and he serves without self-pity, without, like, any of the feelings we would have in that moment. He's incredible. He's so selfless and humble. In that moment where it'd be so tempting for Jesus to be selfish and go, "I've got circumstances." Folks, that's not normal. Like, that's miraculous. Because when us humans have circumstances that are difficult, when we're stressed, for most of us, it would take a miracle for us to serve someone like that. And that is what Jesus did. And in that moment, do you know what else what Jesus did? He calls his followers to do the same exact thing. And he just says it really like, almost offensively, like, if you call Jesus Lord, if you say Jesus is more important than I am, it means that you are not too important to serve just like Jesus did. That's the first observation. Second observation, someone's worthiness does not determine whether you serve or not. So here's Jesus. Not only does he not let his schedule excuse him from serving, but Jesus, think about this for a second. He serves the least deserving people he could find. Like, think about these feet. And think about Jesus looking around the room, right? And, there's Judas. And John is really clear about it. Here's a guy who's about to betray him and hand him off to the Roman authorities. Like, I would skip that guy, to be honest with you. Next there's Peter, who's about to deny even knowing Jesus. And there's 10 other disciples. Like, these are 20 feet that are about to make tracks running the other way when Jesus wants them the most. But here's the thing, the unworthiness of these folks didn't change whether Jesus serves them or not. Here's what Jesus knows and what you'll probably learn about people. People can be awful. Serving people will lead you to being disappointed in them. If you start serving people like Jesus did, you'll find yourself finding people who you pour out your life to who will turn back on you and go, that person did not do enough for me. So you know what's really easy? We get cynical, we get calculating, we get cold, we actually work really hard at not casting pearls before swine, to borrow Jesus' language. Or maybe you've done this, you've gotten down deep and dirty and messy in the lives of people, and maybe you've got burned. And maybe you've vowed to never place yourself in a vulnerable spot like that again. So it's really easy to get cold, protected. And I think what Jesus is doing right now is calling you to take that risk, to move into the messiness of people's lives, to be vulnerable. And he doesn't say it's easy. Like, here's Jesus washing the feet of people, and they betray him just a few hours later. But maybe Jesus is saying that you'll find yourself by dying to yourself and serving others in really risky ways. I believe that when we serve people like this, God does something. He changes us, and he uses us powerfully in the lives of others. Like, here's Jesus serving because it's the right thing to do. But maybe it's also the only way that these 12 disciples might find freedom from the hollow pursuit and the empty pleasures of serving themselves and finding personal glory. That's why he did it. Number 3, this one might be obvious. Your position doesn't determine whether you serve. This is the amazing part of the story. If you just read John 13, Jesus, he knows exactly who he is. The first verse starts off by Jesus saying he knows he's returning to the Father. In verse 3, it's crystal clear. Jesus knows he is the King of the universe. Like, here's Jesus who knows who he is. He's God. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't owe anybody anything. That doesn't stop him, though. In this moment, the creator of the universe, the greatest thing imaginable, humbles himself to wash his disciples' feet, which is amazing if you think about it. In fact, if the humiliation he experienced voluntarily on the cross a few verses later wasn't there, this scene would take the headline. And Jesus is right, though. I think our culture feeds us the lie that the main goal in life is to get more power and more influence and more attention. We get convinced that greatness means we have more attention, more people serving us, and we are fed in a million different ways this idea that purpose, meaning, and joy are found in ascending, getting up to be above people. And Jesus, in that moment, says that all of those things, purpose, joy, fulfillment, meaning, you find it in a really different place. That you actually find it in descending, in humility. And somehow Jesus and his kingdom are going in opposite directions of the values and assumptions that we buy into in this world, and he calls us to join him. And look, if Jesus is right, and he's right, and if you're someone who claims to acknowledge him as Lord, as teacher, as king, here's the question that should be bothering us a little bit. How are we doing at being like Jesus? How great are we? One more observation, and I almost skipped this, but I want to make it. I want to read the verse again. There is in this story just an exceptional promise. If you look at verse 17, Jesus says straight out, now that you know these things, like the whole lesson about serving, Jesus says, you will be blessed if you do them. Let me say that again. Jesus says, this is amazing. After he teaches about now that he says about serving, he says, you will be blessed if you do this. This is an incredible guarantee. Jesus seems to say that your life will be the most happy and blessed as you serve other people. And you experience God's pleasure and your happiness. Jesus says, like, really clearly that when we serve, when we humble ourselves, we're blessed. The word, of course, means happy. And we are being exactly what God made us to be. I mean, think about that. You were created in the image of God. And there is nothing more godlike than serving others. That's what Jesus says. To a community that's divided by selfishness, petty disagreements, competitions. Jesus says the solution to broken community like that is serving. So what do we do with that? Okay, I have two assignments for you. The first one is you have a handout with, it looks like this, with a bunch of one another's in it. I want you to read through these verses this week. And the other thing I want you to do is, with the help of the Holy Spirit, I want you, in the privacy of your own heart, you and God, just ask yourself, what would it look like? What would I have to change to be more like Jesus and follow what he's teaching here? What would I have to give up? Where would I even start? Who could I start serving? And look, this is your assignment. I'll be honest, I don't have the answers for you. And I hope that lots of you will look at this and you'll be prompted to serve and in places that I don't even know about, and love on people that I'm not aware of. And I can't tell you what that looks like in your family, workplace, school, or whatever. So this is your assignment. I'm not going to bias it at all. I will say two things in addition to that. The first thing is this community here, if you just look around, you are surrounded by some of the best examples I can find of Jesus' teaching being lived out. You folks are amazing. I'm not going to tell your stories, but you work hard at loving your families, loving strangers. You help people in need. And of course, we have a lot of church programs. These get announced, but the things that don't get talked about are just amazing. Like I was able to take about a day today and visit a bunch of shut-ins this week, and it was amazing because as I talked to people who couldn't get out, I heard stories that they were telling about you, visiting them, sending food, cards. You guys are encouraging the lonely, helping folks in need, like behind the scenes with no credit. I was just so encouraged to hear about what you guys are doing, showing God's love in that, and lots of other ways, with little thanks, little glory, little credit. I'm so encouraged to be part of, the people in this room, this community, because I want you to hear the words of Jesus' promise and cling to it. Now that you know these things, Jesus says you will be blessed if you do them, and you all are doing these things. I'm so excited to watch as God blesses you. The second thing I want to point out, and I almost skipped this, but not only is this community that people stay next to you serving really well and with your families, with all sorts of other stuff, but this is also an opportunity to serve. We don't like to admit it, but we've all got dirty feet, and I'm convinced God can use you in this church. And if you're not sure how to get involved, I did want to point you to the back of our bulletin. Showing God's love looks like a lot of different ministries, a lot of different gifts. If the Spirit comes back this week and says, you know what, you're serving a lot of places, and could you serve in the church as well? I want to make that really easy for you. I would love to see this church be a place where you could model who God is. And if you'd like to put your faith into practice here, if there's a need or a passion on, here that you're drawn to, and there's something for everyone to do, and sometimes it looks just like praying or making an encouraging phone call. But if this church can help you do what Jesus wants you to do, I want to make it really easy for you. And by the way, I didn't put this on the screen. I'm not encouraging you to serve because we need help. Like, we do need help. Like, we've got kids that need to be taught to have hope. We need to teach character and ethics. We've got shut-ins who are lonely. We've got a ton of things that God has called this church to do, but that's not why I'm asking you to serve. I've got a way better reason. We serve humbly because Jesus commands it. He models it. And Jesus makes this promise that serving people humbly is the best route to a life of contentment, purpose, joy, and greatness as we are united with Christ and follow his example out of gratitude for how he served, humbled himself, and loved us. So, Father in heaven, thank you that even though you are the all-powerful creator, king of the universe, God, you did something amazing by humbling yourself. And you love us in ways that are just, we sang it earlier, just amazing. Can you give us a vision for the love you have for us, that the work of our hands could never accomplish, could never earn your love? And could you help us to give that same kind of humble love and service wherever you've placed us, with our families, with our kids, with our parents, with our coworkers, at our jobs, at our schools, in our church community, wherever you place us, may we be a model following you, O Christ. I ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.